Hello everyone, it's Smitepan's Chess, and today we're going to look at the second game between Bobby Fischer and Rodolfo Cardoso. So this is the second match in their game when Bobby Fischer was 14 years old and Cardoso from the Philippines was 19 years old. This game was played in 1957. We're going to look at it from the white perspective, which is Bobby Fischer's perspective. So, the game began with 1e4. Black played the Sicilian with c5. Fischer played knight to f3, d6, d4, c takes d4, knight takes, and black played knight to f6, hitting the e4 pawn. White defends this pawn, black plays a6. So a6 stops any knight jumping in to b5, and Fischer plays bishop to c4. So basically white's got three pieces out and a nicely placed bishop hitting this side of the board, and black now plays e6 to sort of blunt this bishop and stagnate it a bit. Now typically here, our usual move to play is bishop to b3, and black can play knight c6, white can play f4, and a lot of players now play bishop e7 and castle, where black takes on d4, queen takes and plays b5, and white can hit in with f5 and black can castle. So this is just another variation that's typically played between top level players, and the assessment nowadays is that it's quite equal for both sides. However, rather than play bishop b3, Bobby Fischer castled in this position. Black played bishop to e7, and again white can play bishop to b3 here if they wish, and play can continue with b5, queen to f3, where white's got some plans here playing e5. If black plays bishop b7 to stop any e5 ideas and pin this pawn against the queen, white's got an interesting move here with bishop takes e6, because after f takes e6, white can play knight takes and attack the queen and the g7 pawn. So once the queen moves, white's got knight takes g7, king d8, and I looked at this with an engine and rook e1 was considered the best move here, and if black plays knight c6, white can play bishop f4. And the point is now that actually white's got two pawns for the piece, and it leads to a very unbalanced, interesting game. So I thought I'd throw this variation in there because it leads to some interesting positions. Again, I'm not saying it's safe for white. The computers actually suggest it's quite even for both sides, but I just thought it was interesting nonetheless. So bishop b3 and a sacrifice on bishop e6 could have been possible. However, Fischer just plays normally, plays bishop to e3, developing. Cardoso castled. Fischer played bishop to b3 now, and then black played knight c6. And now Fischer goes in for the attack. So we're already into a Sozin attack in the Sicilian, and Fischer plays f4. So basically you're going to pawn storm, attack black's king. Now black's got numerous ideas here. One of them was bishop d7 in this position. White can play f5, and after knight takes d4, bishop takes d4 and b5. White has the option to take this e6 pawn. So they can take this e6 pawn, and if let's say f takes, then white can win a pawn with bishop takes f6, bishop takes f6, and then queen takes d6. So white will be a pawn up in this position. However, black does have the two bishops. But a pawn is a pawn, as they say, and I think white's definitely got an advantage here. If black tries to hold on to the pawn with rook takes f6 instead, I think white gets another good game with rook takes and g takes and play queen g4 check. After king f7 to defend this e6 pawn, then there's a few checks, king g7 check, king f7, but so after this white could play knight to d5 here. The point is if he takes d5, then this bishop takes d5 with check, leading to checkmate. So again, white's got a very nice position here. So I think for this reason, instead of playing bishop d7 and getting to that variation that we just saw, black played knight to a5 first, trying to get rid of this bishop on b3. I think this is a wise choice, but Fischer now continues queen f3, develops his last piece, the rooks are connected, and white's good to go for an attack. Cardoso played queen to c7, and Fischer now played a g4 move. It looks rather dubious, but white's just got a great pawn storm coming, going to play g5. Cardoso took the bishop on b3, Fischer recaptured, and now black actually wastes a bit of time, because he can't play b5 here straight away, because then knight takes b5 and the a pawn is pinned. So for this reason in the game, black played rook to b8, preparing b5 and getting off this a file away from white's rook. But this rook b8 move sort of loses black some time. And whilst this is going on, Fischer can just play g5 now, hit the knight, which is forced back to d7, and Fischer played f5. So white's attack is already here, and black may have a bit of defending to do later in the game. I think Cardoso played a good move here though, knight to e5, attacking the queen. So this knight on e5 is very nicely placed to defend black's position. And Fischer is forced to move his queen, so he moves it to g3. But queen g3 actually has a threat behind it. He's threatening to play f6, next move for white. The point is this g-pawn will be pinned against the queen. So for instance, let's just say black plays a nothing move like, I don't know, rook a8 here. f6 is absolutely devastating because if g takes, then there's g takes with check. And that could lead to mate. I think like g6 they could block it, but even so, just f takes e7, white wins a piece. So after queen g3, black's got to be extra careful. Rook e8 could have been played actually by Cardoso here, because after f6, black could have played bishop f8, and they're relatively quite safe here. h4 was given by the engine as the best move for white if that happened. Black could continue with b5, h5 and bishop b7. Rook f4 was the best move, protecting this e4 pawn, and if b4, the knight can drop back, and if d5, this takes, bishop takes, rook a f1. Again, I think white's got a perfectly great position here, but black is holding on, and it's going to be very hard to break down. This knight on e5 protects this f7 square, the bishop protects the g7 pawn. But saying that, white does have a huge space advantage. I think we'd all prefer to take white, but black is clinging on to life here. So saying that, rook e8 was definitely the best move for black. Instead though, Cardoso got off the g file and played king h8. And Fischer was quite pragmatic here. He played knight to f3, trying to get rid of this knight on e5, which is absolutely black's best piece, and holding their position together. Saying that though, rook f4 was actually a better move, because after b5 there's rook h4, and white's plan is switched. They can start harassing this h7 pawn. After rook d8, queen h3, put a battery against this pawn, and if h6, white has the supreme move f6. The h pawn is pinned and the bishop is attacked. If bishop f8, white can calmly play rook f1 and get their last piece into the attack, and a lot of taking is going to occur against black's king, and white should have a won position. But saying that, I don't want to be too harsh on Fischer. He was only 14 years old, and knight to f3 is a sound move. Cardoso took this knight off with knight takes, Fischer recaptured with their rook, and black finally gets b5 in, but maybe it's too little too late. Fischer finally comes up with a decent plan and plays queen h4, preparing to play rook h3 and battery against this pawn. For instance, let's say h6 here, white can just play f6, attack the bishop and this weak g7 pawn, and a move later start taking on h6. So after queen h4, black's got a lot of defending to do and thinking to do of how to defend their position. In the game, e takes f5 was played by black, and Fischer did recapture with their pawn. However, bishop d4 was an actually savage move that white could have played here, and probably would have won instantly, because after f takes e4, white has knight d5, attacking the queen and bishop, and if queen d7, there's a nice sacrifice, bishop takes g7 with check, king takes, queen h6 check, king h8 and then g6. So white's now threatening to play queen takes h7, which is checkmate, and they can't play f takes g6 because then rook takes rook, bishop takes, queen takes is checkmate. So after g6, if queen to g4 check, white can just play rook to g3, and still white's threatening mate. So after f takes g6, just play knight takes e7. The queen's attacked by the rook, and knight takes g6 is coming next move, and this h pawn is pinned. Also, the queen attacks this rook as well. So black's totally lost in this endgame. So bishop d4 was definitely a great move, but Fischer was probably thinking he's winning this game anyway, and he played e takes f5. Queen c6 was played, attacking the rook on f3, and Fischer defends with rook a to f1. Interestingly, Kasparov found a really good move for white here, which was knight to e4. So blocks the queen. And if rook e8, f6, attacks bishop and the pawn again, and if bishop f8 is g6. So this is a massive attack. Again, white's threatening to take on h7 with the queen, threatening mate, and if f takes g6, white's got this bishop d4 move again. threatening to play f takes g7. If bishop to g4, f takes g7, bishop takes g7, white can finish with knight to f6, threatening mate again. After h5, play rook f4. And now the rook's threatening to take this bishop on g4, and also this knight is now threatening to take this rook as well, so again black's probably lost in this position. But back to the game, queen c6 has just been played. Fischer played rook af1, protecting the rook. Again, this is fairly decent. Bishop b7, and all of a sudden this queen now eyes up this rook on f3, so black could prepare to use their queen to take two rooks off the board if they wished. So Fischer really has to now hurry up with their attack, otherwise they might be losing this game. And he did hurry up. He played bishop d4, probably one of the best moves at this current position. Finding the right plan, attacking this diagonal. Now black could have gone in for queen takes rook here with queen takes rook, rook takes queen and bishop takes. But there's a nice sacrifice with bishop takes g7. If king takes, there's queen h6, king h8 and now g6. Threatening mate on h7 again. After takes and f takes, again white's threatening to take on h7, and there's literally no way to stop this from occurring. And black is totally lost. So for that reason, instead of black taking the rooks, he played b4, attacking the knight. And I think Fischer here at 14 years old saw a Talesque victory here because he played bishop takes g7 check, sacrificing his bishop. First though, I'll just go through probably a stronger move, which was queen h5. The point is after f6, g6, again threatening mate, and h6. The better idea was probably bishop to e3, preparing to sack on h6. And even here after queen takes f3, rook takes f3, bishop takes f3, and then the queen can recapture. Black can take the knight, but now again white has his sacrifice, bishop takes h6. And if g takes, there's queen e3 at the end of it. And they're going to take this pawn or this bishop, and if king g7 just queen takes bishop, it's just for one game. So if we just go back to the game, queen h5 was definitely a great plan here. Bishop takes g7 though, again a very good move. I probably would have preferred this in the game, but the grandmasters have a problem with it because it actually is a drawn position, amazingly. Because after king takes g7, queen h6, king h8 and g6, again threatening mate on this h7 square. This is actually a draw, but it's very difficult to see. I mean, the computers all know it's a draw, but this is difficult for any human player. I wonder what you would play in this position, because I don't think I would find it. So black's got to stop queen takes h7 mate, and I guess the only way to do this is f takes g6. So after f takes g6, there's now a drawish move that black can play. And I guess the key behind this move is that the queen is threatening mate on g2. So amazingly, the only way to defend this h7 pawn is to play rook to f7, which defends the h7 square. And after g takes the rook, rook f8 should be played. And now, again, I'll just put an arrow in here because the queen is still threatening mate on g2. And the point is now rook takes f7 is the threat for black. And white can't recapture because then the queen would lead to mate. So black's now threatening to take this pawn off. And so queen e6 defends it, and black should now play queen c5 check. If they block with the third rank rook, rook to f2 here, queen g5 would win for black. It would just lead to mate because this bishop is just too strong, and the rook has to block, and then it's queen takes rook, checkmate. So after queen c5, they should block with the first rank rook, rook 1 to f2 instead, and black can play bishop takes the rook. And white should now play knight to e4, stopping any queen g5 ideas, and attacks the queen as well. If bishop takes e4, then white can play queen takes e7, and that's probably one for white now, because they're attacking this rook with check, and can play queen f6 next move as well. So after white plays this crazy knight to e4 move, black should play queen to e3. And after queen takes e7, black can use a perpetual check with queen to e1 check, rook f1, queen e3, and that's a dead draw. The knight can't block because then queen takes queen will be played, and so rook f2 has to be played, followed by queen e1, a perpetual check. Again, I should just say this is an absolutely computer variation. There's no way in hell that a human player would be able to see this, I would imagine. I can't imagine even the strongest players would see this finish. So for that reason I'm not going to be too harsh on black, but after g6, f takes g6 here would have saved black's position. Instead though he played queen c5 check, and white still has to be quite accurate. Again, if they block with the third rank rook, then f takes g6 can be played followed by f takes g6, and rook f7 again saves black, because after pawn takes rook, b takes c3. And actually here, black's winning the game and has a miraculous turnaround, just because this bishop covers the key squares, and if there's ever a queen e6, I believe black may be able to play queen to g5 check again. So it's going to be very difficult for white. So in the game after queen c5, Fischer found the best move, using the first rank rook to block the check. F takes g6 was played, f takes g6. Again white's threatening mate, and now this rook f7 idea doesn't work for black because this queen is no longer on c6, threatening mate on g2. So that's gone. So instead, after f takes g6, black has to play queen g5 check. Fischer takes the queen, bishop takes, and there's a nice finish here with Fischer taking the rook on f8 with check. The rook recaptures, rook takes f8 and king g7. Fischer calmly plays g takes h7. The point is, if the king takes the rook, white will queen this pawn, and if king takes the pawn, then rook f7 check, king g6, rook takes b7, an easily won endgame for white. Even if b takes c3, b takes c3, white should still be able to win this endgame. So anyway, that was the second game in the match between Bobby Fischer and Rodolfo Cardoso. I'll make sure to go through the rest of the games in the future, but this was a great game with good attacking resources from Fischer. Again, Fischer showed great promise as a 14-year-old on his way to becoming the world champion. We definitely can see some spark of genius in his play. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed these videos. Please drop a like, comment or subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and hopefully I'll see you in the next video soon. Goodbye for now.